23-foot sperm whale became beached on Long Island, New York on a cold mid-April morning in 1981. The 10-day struggle to save his life was a voluntary effort by many dedicated people. The opportunity to learn about this whale and help him has enhanced the lives of all who shared the experience. This young whale showed man the reality, the mystery, and the beauty of one of this planet's most awesome creatures. It began on April 16, 1981, and the water was cold by human standards, so the rescuers who waded into the surf, led by marine veterinarian Dr. J. Hyman, were confronted not only by chilling seas, but by a 12-ton, 25-foot animal in distress. With the tide going out, the rescue group felt that the receding waters would soon leave the whale stranded on the beach to die. In order to move the whale to calmer waters for treatment and rest, the decision was made by Sam Sadov of the Okinos Foundation to tow him to Captree Boat Basin on Fire Island. The plan was to wrap a rope around the tail and pull him slowly by a Coast Guard vessel 1.5 miles across the channel to the boat basin. Looping the rope around the tail was risky. Even a chance blow of the tail fluke could break a man's back. The placement of the rope didn't seem to greatly disturb the whale, who by now was facing out to sea. No great whale had ever survived a prolonged stranding before, but there was always hope, and this whale was still fighting strongly for life. As the slack was pulled up, the whale's reaction became violent as the alien rope tightened around his tail. Thrashing wildly as the rope jerked him backwards, his body grated against the sand. As the sick and injured sperm whale was dragged into deeper water, not only was his tail being deeply gouged, but his head and blowhole were being pulled under the waves. At this point in his ordeal, this whale could have easily drowned or died of shock, but he didn't, although many other whales do. To successfully rescue stranded whales, more humane and effective methods must be used.
Okay, this is a unique opportunity to observe a sperm whale. You don't usually get them close to shore. These are deep diving animals. They're usually out in 50 fathoms of water.
But the whale couldn't be cared for in 50 fathoms. The doctors wanted to be able to control him. So, in obvious shock, with his wounds still fresh, he remained tied to a piling in 10 feet of shallow water at the boat basin. As word spread of the whale's plight, a crowd of sympathetic onlookers gathered and grew. They adopted the name Physty for the whale, inspired by his Latin name, Physeter catodon, and by the word Physty, meaning a fight for life. Meanwhile, Physty needed help. A team of medical specialists went to work to determine the whale's injuries and illness. Treatment was begun with steroids for shock and penicillin for general infection as well as suspected pneumonia. But the inability to draw blood frustrated Doctors Weiner and Beekman. This whale, like all cetaceans, could control the flow of blood to various parts of his body at will.
Side effects, Dave. Well, prognosis is poor, but we're doing what we can for it.
The crowd grew, both in size and in its concern for Physty. By now, thousands of people were coming every day to watch the whale's struggle against death.
It's comparable to a situation where a visitor from another planet arrived here. And for that reason, because we know so little about these animals, it's worth taking a good, close look at it.
Many more people than had ever hunted whales came to watch, cry, and cheer this single animal. But Physty wasn't getting any better. No way had yet been found to treat and feed him. Dr. Hyman called on Northwind Undersea Institute for help. Captain Michael Sanlofer spent hours in the water trying to establish a bond of trust, which finally paid off. With Dave Weiner assisting him, Physty took food, a squid, from Captain Sanlofer's hand. With this encouraging sign of life from Physty, blood samples were attempted once again, leaving the whale uncooperative as his condition seemed to worsen. On into the night, the divers worked to regain Physty's trust as they tended the weakening whale. The divers from Northwind decided to try a new approach in reaching and communicating with the stricken whale.
When it felt the warmth from my hand on the whale's body, it reacted.
Physty continued to deteriorate. A culture taken from the whale's blowhole was rushed to Stony Brook University for analysis. The bacteria was identified and Park Davis Pharmaceuticals agreed to helicopter in the special antibiotics they hoped would save Physty's life. Physty now lay dying, grounded in a shallow corner of the boat basin, his body scraping against the barnacle-encrusted dock. Desperate measures were tried to force his mouth open with a 2x4 so that crucial medication could be pumped into his stomach. But Captain Sanlofer arrived in time to protest this type of treatment and immediately placed buoys between the whale and the dock to prevent further abrasions. He too tried to coax Physty to accept the medication-carrying tube, but to no avail.
You're watching an animal just slowly die. There's unfortunately nothing we can do at this point.
As Physty hovered near death, the doctors wanted to obtain a fresh blood sample from the whale while he still lived. But although a blood vessel was found in a pectoral fin, no blood could be extracted. The only other possibility was the whale's very powerful and dangerous tail fluke. With Northwind diver Richie Romanelli by the eye, Captain Sanlofer braced the tail for Dr. Weiner. Physty watched them closely. The crowd grew still. They found a vein, but had to stop as the whale's tail threw them back. No blood sample was gotten. Perhaps now the whale could die in peace and dignity.
Well, the infection that it has just overwhelmed it. Just doesn't have any more strength to fight back.
As the medical and scientific team left to plan the necropsy on the soon-to-be dead whale, the divers in the crowd maintained their vigil. This whale would not die alone.
Gentle giant, hear my plea. Sing to me of ancient times, master swimming, free at sea. Pass to me through nursery rhyme. Gentle giant, hear my voice. Sing the language of my birth. Gentle master, nature's choice. Tell me what our world
As long as there's an eye reflex, she's alive, too, besides the sound. You feel it pulse?
Yeah. Sure do.
You're really helping her. She's very peaceful, isn't she?
Yeah.
Although Physty was still alive at sunset, the situation looked hopeless. If the whale didn't accept medication that night, he might be dead by morning. Captain Sandlofer felt that his bond with Physty might allow him to persuade the whale to take the antibiotics if they were packed inside a squid. In almost total darkness and accompanied by a safety boat, Sandlofer swam out to Physty. After a few minutes of contact and stroking, Physty accepted the first medicated squid. Then a second squid was accepted, but Sandlofer's hand became caught in the whale's mouth. He was pulled under, and for a dangerous moment was pressed against the bottom of the boat basin. Suddenly the whale released the diver. Sandlofer swam away, but returned with a third antibiotic-stuffed squid, which Physty gently took from his hand. Captain Sandlofer had proven that medicine could be given to this whale. The next morning, more squid were carefully prepared. Dr. Hyman and Captain Sandlofer got on the water with Physty just hours after the night feeding. Physty seemed like a different whale, swimming vigorously. Sandlofer called Physty with a special sound he had been using to identify himself, and Physty swam over to him. He stopped right next to the diver, rowed over, opened his 4-foot mouth and took the squid that Sandlofer offered to him. Physty took another squid, and another. After his third squid, Physty bumped Captain Sandlofer with his pectoral fin, nudging him up onto the whale's back. Sandlofer held on, and the whale and the diver swam together around the boat basin. It seemed to all who watched that Physty was ready to be returned to sea.
I related with the whale through touch. That whale is very sensitive, it's full of life and feeling.
The rescue workers moved quickly to plan Physty's release. Working together under the direction of National Marine Fisheries, Lieutenant Robert Taylor of the Coast Guard and the North Wind team coordinated the elaborate plans needed to guide Physty safely out of the boat basin and on to freedom. The whale was guided out of the basin by an inflatable boat carrying Dr. Hyman, Captain Sandlofer, and Charlie Radd, then followed by a small fleet of Coast Guard vessels under the command of Lieutenant Taylor. Physty was also aided by a strong outgoing tidal current, but the whale stopped just outside the boat basin.
Hold back, hold back.
The escorting boats held their position.
Go ahead, on ahead, hello, Chief.
After a brief pause, he used his echolocation, directed himself, and continued on. The vessels formed a sound barrier around Physty and left open the direction they wished him to go.
Good, super. That's great, okay.
Gentle giant, free at sea. You can know what you've given to me. Happy memories, happy me. You are home, and now you're free.
As he approached the opening of the bay, he swam stronger and faster than before.
Gentle giant, free at sea. You can't know what you've given to me. Happy memories, happy me. You are home now.
For the first time in recorded history, a large whale had survived a prolonged stranding.